When Lena Park was just 5 years old, she heard a piano for the first time. It was at a neighbor's house during a small gathering her mother had taken her to. A woman sat in the corner of the living room, her fingers dancing across black and white keys, and the sound that filled the room made little Lena stop breathing for a moment. She had never heard anything so beautiful in her entire short life. It felt like magic, like the woman was pulling something invisible out of thin air and turning it into feelings. From that day on, Lena was obsessed. She would hum melodies she made up in her head. She would tap her fingers on tables, on books, on her own knees, pretending she was playing a real piano. At night, she would dream about sitting at one of those shiny instruments, creating music that made people stop and listen. But dreams cost money. And money was something her family never had enough of. Lena grew up in a small apartment above a laundromat. Her father worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, and her mother cleaned houses during the day and took in sewing work at night. They were good people, hard-working people, but there was never anything left over at the end of the month. Piano lessons were a luxury that belonged to other children with bigger houses and parents who didn't have to count every dollar. Still, Lena held on to her dream. Every week, she would walk past the music shop on her way home from school. She would stand outside the window and watch the lessons happening inside. Children her age sat at beautiful pianos while teachers guided their hands. She memorized the way their fingers moved. She studied the sheet music propped up in front of them, even though she couldn't read a single note. She told herself that one day, somehow, she would learn. When she was 10, she finally got brave enough to ask. She waited until her father was in a good mood, sitting in his chair after dinner, and she asked if, maybe, just maybe, she could take piano lessons. Her father's face changed. Not to anger, but to something worse. Sadness. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. We just can't afford it right now. Maybe next year." I lied. Next year never came. When Lena turned 12, everything changed. Her mother started getting tired all the time. At first, everyone thought it was just exhaustion from working so hard. But then came the doctor visits, the tests, the diagnosis. Her mother had a chronic illness that would require years of treatment and care. There was no cure, only management, and management was expensive. Lena watched her mother grow weaker. She watched her father age 10 years, in just a few months from the stress and worry. And without anyone asking her to, she stepped up. She started helping around the house more. She cooked dinner when her mother was too tired. She cleaned. She did laundry downstairs in the shop they lived above. She learned to be quiet about her own needs. Because there were bigger problems now. The piano became something she no longer allowed herself to think about. It felt selfish to dream about music when her mother was sick. It felt childish to want something so badly when her family was struggling just to survive. So she packed that dream away in a small box inside her heart, and she tried her best to forget it was ever there. Years passed. Lena finished high school and got a job right away because college wasn't an option. She worked at a grocery store first, then at a clothing shop, and eventually she found steady work as a receptionist at a hospital. The pay wasn't great, but it was reliable. And it came with health insurance that helped cover some of her mother's ongoing care. Her father passed away when she was 26. A heart attack. Sudden and unexpected. The doctors said his heart had simply given out. Lena knew the truth. Years of stress and worry had worn him down. He had worked himself to the bone trying to provide for his family, and in the end, his body just couldn't take it anymore. After the funeral, Lena moved back into the old apartment above the laundromat to take care of her mother full-time. She worked during the day and came home to cook, clean, and make sure her mother took her medications. Her life became a routine of responsibility. Wake up, work, come home, take care of things, sleep, repeat. She was 34 years old now, and she couldn't remember the last time she had done something just for herself. Every evening, on her walk home from the hospital, Lena passed by the community center on 5th Street. It was an old brick building with big windows that were always open in the summer. And almost every evening, she could hear it. Piano music. Sometimes it was clumsy and hesitant, the sound of someone learning. Other times it was smooth and confident, melodies that floated out into the street like an invitation. Lena always slowed down when she passed by. Sometimes she stopped completely. She would close her eyes and just listen, letting the music wash over her. In those moments, she was 5 years old again, standing in that neighbor's living room, watching magic happen. But then the song would end, and reality would come rushing back. She would open her eyes, shake her head at herself, and keep walking. What was the point of dreaming now? She was too old to start learning an instrument. Her fingers were stiff from years of typing at a computer. She had no natural talent, no training, no background in music at all. People who played piano had started as children. They had years of practice behind them. She had nothing. Besides, when would she even find the time? Between work and taking care of her mother, she barely had an hour to herself each day. That hour was usually spent eating dinner in front of the television, too tired to do anything else. No. The piano was not meant for someone like her. It was meant for people with talent, and time, and money. People who had been given chances early in life. Lena had missed her chance a long time ago, and there was no getting it back. That's what she told herself every single night as she walked past those open windows. That's what she believed with her whole heart. She had no idea that everything was about to change. That one ordinary evening, a sudden rainstorm would push her through the doors of that community center. That she would find herself standing in front of a piano for the first time in her life, and that a stranger with kind eyes and a gentle voice would say the words she had been waiting 30 years to hear. But that evening hadn't come yet. For now, Lena Park was just a tired woman walking home from work, listening to music she believed she would never make, dreaming a dream she had convinced herself was already dead. She had no way of knowing that some dreams don't die. They just wait. They wait for the right moment, the right person, and the right push. And hers was coming. It was a Tuesday evening in late September, when the sky decided to open up without any warning. One moment, Lena was walking home from work, under a gray but calm sky. The next moment, rain was pouring down so hard she could barely see 2 feet in front of her. She had no umbrella, no jacket with a hood, nothing but her thin work cardigan that soaked through in seconds. The rain was cold, the kind that cuts right through to your bones, and within moments she was completely drenched. Lena looked around desperately for somewhere to wait out the storm. The bus stop was too far. The shops on this street were already closed for the evening. And then, she saw it. The community center on 5th Street, with its big wooden doors and warm light glowing from inside. She had walked past this building hundreds of times. She had stopped outside to listen to the piano music more times than she could count. But she had never once gone inside. It had always felt like a place that wasn't meant for her. A place for people who had hobbies and free time and lives that weren't built entirely around survival. But the rain was getting heavier, and she was shivering now. So she ran up the steps and pushed through the doors. The lobby was warm and quiet. An old radiator clicked and hummed in the corner. There was a bulletin board covered in flyers for yoga classes, book clubs, and senior fitness programs. A young woman sat behind a reception desk, scrolling through her phone, and she barely looked up when Lena walked in. Lena stood there, dripping onto the worn carpet, not sure what to do. She felt out of place, like she had wandered into someone else's world by accident. She thought about just standing by the door until the rain stopped, but the water was pooling at her feet, and she felt embarrassed. So she started walking. Down the hallway, past closed doors and faded motivational posters. She told herself she was just looking for a bathroom, somewhere to dry off a little, but her feet seemed to have a different idea. They carried her deeper into the building, past the fitness room, past the art studio, until she turned a corner and found herself standing in front of an open door. Inside was a small room with wooden floors and tall windows. The rain streaked down the glass, blurring the streetlights outside. And there, in the center of the room, stood an old, upright piano. Lena felt her breath catch in her throat. The piano was nothing fancy. Its wood was scratched and worn. Some of the white keys had turned yellow with age. But to Lena, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She stepped into the room without thinking, drawn forward like something was pulling her by an invisible string. She stopped a few feet away from the piano, just staring at it. Her heart was beating fast. Her hands were trembling, and she wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from something else entirely. She wanted to touch it. She wanted to sit down and press the keys and hear what sounds would come out. But she couldn't move. It felt wrong somehow. Like she didn't have permission, like she would break some unspoken rule just by trying. "You can touch it, you know." The voice came from behind her, and Lena spun around so fast she almost lost her balance. An old man stood in the doorway. He looked to be in his early 70s, with silver hair combed back neatly and deep lines around his eyes that came from years of smiling. He wore a simple button-down shirt and brown suspenders, and his hands were tucked casually into his pockets. There was something calm about him, something steady. "I'm sorry," Lena said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just trying to get out of the rain, and I got a little lost." And the man held up a hand gently, stopping her flood of words. "No need to apologize. This room is open to everyone. That's the whole point of a community center, isn't it?" Lena didn't know what to say. She glanced back at the piano, then down at her soaking wet clothes. "I've just never played before. I don't know the first thing about it." "Neither did I once," the man said simply. He walked into the room, his footsteps soft on the wooden floor. "My name is Raymond. I volunteer here a few evenings a week, teaching piano to anyone who wants to learn." "That's very kind of you," Lena said. She meant it, but there was a wall going up inside her. The same wall she had built over 30 years of protecting herself from disappointment. "I'm sure you have plenty of students already." Raymond smiled. It was the kind of smile that made you feel like he could see right through you. Not in a scary way, but in a way that made you feel understood. "I have a few," he said. "Mostly kids. A couple of teenagers. But I've always thought adults make the most interesting students. They come with more fear, but also more hunger." Lena felt her face flush. "I'm not sure I'd make a good student. I'm too old to start something like this, and I don't have any talent. I've never even read sheet music before." Raymond walked over to the piano and ran his hand along the top of it, brushing away a thin layer of dust. "Can I tell you something? Talent is the most overrated word in the English language. I've taught students with natural talent who quit after 6 months because they got bored. And I've taught students with no talent at all who stuck with it and became wonderful musicians. You know what the difference was?" Lena shook her head. "The ones who kept going actually wanted it," Raymond said. "They weren't playing to impress anyone or prove anything. They played because the music meant something to them. Because they couldn't imagine not trying." He turned and looked at Lena with those calm, knowing eyes. "You've been standing outside this building listening to the music for months now. I've seen you through the window. A person doesn't do that unless the music means something to them." Lena felt her eyes sting. She wanted to argue with him. She wanted to explain all the reasons why this was a waste of time. Why she was too old, too busy, too far behind everyone else. But the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, she knew he was right. The music did mean something to her. It always had. Raymond pulled out the piano bench and gestured toward it. Lena hesitated. Every logical part of her brain was screaming at her to leave. To thank this kind old man for his time and walk out the door and never come back. This was foolish. This was a waste of time. This was setting herself up for failure and disappointment. But her feet moved anyway. And before she knew what was happening, she was sitting on that bench, her wet clothes forgotten. Her hands resting on her lap just inches away from the keys. Raymond sat down next to her. "Go ahead, press 1. Any key you want." Lena took a shaky breath. She lifted her right hand, and slowly, carefully, she pressed down on one of the white keys in the middle of the piano. A single note rang out into the room. It was simple. Just one sound. But to Lena, it felt like something much bigger. It felt like a door opening after being locked for 30 years. She pressed another key. Then another. The notes weren't a melody. They weren't music. They were just sounds. Random and unconnected. But they were sounds she was making. With her own hands. On a real piano. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Lena Park felt something she had forgotten was possible. She felt hope. Raymond watched her with a gentle smile. Same time next Thursday? Lena looked at him. She thought about her job, her mother, her exhaustion, all the reasons she had built up over the years for why she couldn't have this. And then she thought about that little girl standing outside the music shop window, dreaming of a moment just like this one. Same time next Thursday, she said. And just like that, everything changed. The first few weeks were exciting. Everything was new. Learning where to place her fingers, understanding the difference between the black keys and the white keys, figuring out how to read the most basic sheet music. Lena felt like a child again, discovering something wonderful for the very first time. She would come home from her Thursday lessons with a smile on her face, humming little melodies under her breath while she made dinner for her mother. But then the excitement began to fade, and reality started to set in. By the second month, Lena realized just how far behind she really was. Raymond had given her simple exercises to practice at home, but she didn't have a piano. She couldn't afford one, so she practiced on a small keyboard she found at a thrift store for $12. Half the keys stuck, and the sound was tinny and cheap, nothing like the warm tones of the piano at the community center. But it was all she had. She practiced every morning before work, waking up an hour earlier just to squeeze in some time. Her fingers fumbled over the keys. She made the same mistakes over and over again. Songs that children learned in their first week took her 3 weeks to get through. And even then, she could hear how clumsy she sounded. How unnatural. How wrong. At her Thursday lessons, Raymond was patient. He never raised his voice or showed frustration. He would gently correct her hand position, remind her to relax her shoulders, encourage her to try again. But Lena could see the truth. She wasn't improving fast enough. She was struggling with things that should have been easy. One evening, about 4 months into her lessons, Lena arrived at the community center feeling heavier than usual. It had been a long week at work. Her mother had been having more bad days than good ones lately. And that morning, during her practice session, she had tried to play a simple song called Ode to Joy, and failed so badly that she had to stop halfway through and just sit there in silence, staring at her useless hands. She walked into the piano room and sat down on the bench without saying a word. Raymond noticed right away. He always noticed. "Rough day?" he asked gently. Lena nodded but didn't look at him. She placed her hands on the keys and started playing the scale exercises they always began with. But her fingers felt stiff and uncooperative. She hit a wrong note almost immediately. Then another. Then another. The sounds coming out of the piano were harsh and ugly. And each mistake felt like a small knife in her chest. She stopped playing and let her hands fall into her lap. "I don't think I can do this," she said quietly. Raymond didn't respond right away. He just sat there in the chair beside the piano, waiting. "I've been trying so hard," Lena continued, her voice starting to shake. "I practice every single morning. I watch videos online. I read about music theory until my eyes hurt, but nothing is working. I still sound terrible. I still can't get through a single song without making a dozen mistakes." She finally looked at Raymond, and her eyes were wet with tears she was trying very hard not to let fall. "I'm 34 years old," she said. "I should have learned this when I was a child. It's too late for me now. My brain doesn't work like a kid's brain. My fingers don't move the way they're supposed to. I'm never going to be good at this. I'm just wasting your time." Raymond listened to every word without interrupting. When she was finished, he was quiet for a long moment. The room was silent except for the rain that had started falling outside, tapping gently against the windows. Then he spoke. "Can I tell you a story?" Lena wiped her eyes and nodded. Raymond leaned back in his chair and looked up at the ceiling, as if he was reaching into the past to pull out a memory. "When I was 40 years old, I was playing piano professionally. Jazz clubs, mostly. Small venues around the city. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was mine. The piano was everything to me. It was how I made my living. It was how I understood the world. It was the only thing I had ever been truly good at. He paused and took a slow breath. And then I started losing my hearing. Lena looked at him, her own problems suddenly feeling very small. It started with a ringing in my left ear. Raymond continued. At first, I ignored it. Thought it would go away. But it got worse. The ringing turned into muffled sounds. And then one day, I woke up and realized I couldn't hear anything at all on that side. The doctors told me the damage was permanent. Something to do with the nerves. There was nothing they could do. He looked at Lena with those calm, steady eyes. Do you know what it's like to be a musician who can't fully hear the music? It's like being a painter who's going blind. Everything I had built my life around suddenly felt impossible. I thought my career was over. I thought my life was over. What did you do? Lena asked softly. Raymond smiled, but it was a sad smile, full of old pain. I quit. For almost 2 years, I didn't touch a piano. I couldn't stand to sit at one and hear how different everything sounded, how off balance, how incomplete. I told myself the same things you're telling yourself right now. That it was too late, that I would never be good enough again, that I should just give up and accept reality. He leaned forward slightly. But here's the thing about giving up. It doesn't make the longing go away. I could stay away from pianos. I could tell myself I was done with music, but every time I heard a song on the radio, every time I passed a jazz club, every time I dreamed at night, the piano was there, waiting for me, asking me why I had abandoned it. Lena felt a tear roll down her cheek. She didn't bother wiping it away. So one day, Raymond continued, I sat back down at a piano, and I decided I wasn't going to try to play the way I used to. I wasn't going to chase perfection or compare myself to who I had been before. I was just going to play. Whatever came out, whatever it sounded like, I was going to let it be enough. He reached over and placed a gentle hand on Lena's shoulder. That's the secret, Lena. It's not about being good enough. It's about showing up. It's about letting the music be whatever it needs to be in that moment. You're not behind. You're not too old. You're not wasting anyone's time. You're exactly where you need to be. Lena sat there, letting his words sink in. For so long, she had been measuring herself against some impossible standard. She had been comparing herself to children who had years of lessons, to professionals on videos, to some imaginary version of herself that had learned piano at 5 years old and never stopped. But that version of herself didn't exist. The only version that existed was the one sitting here right now, with clumsy fingers and a tired body and a heart that still, after everything, wanted to make music. I don't know if I can stop comparing myself, she admitted. Raymond smiled warmly. You don't have to stop all at once. Just try to catch yourself when you do it. And every time you catch yourself, remind yourself of one thing. You're not playing to prove anything to anyone. You're playing because the music matters to you. That's reason enough. Lena looked at the piano keys in front of her. They looked the same as they always did. But somehow, they felt a little less intimidating now. She placed her hands on the keys again. Can we start from the beginning? She asked. Raymond nodded. We can start from wherever you want. And so she played. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close. But for the first time, she didn't let that stop her. She just kept going. Something changed after that night. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. There was no lightning bolt moment where everything clicked into place. But slowly, quietly, Lena began to approach the piano differently. She still woke up an hour early every morning to practice on her little thrift store keyboard. She still made mistakes. She still struggled with things that seemed like they should be simple. But now, when she hit a wrong note, she didn't punish herself for it. She just took a breath and tried again. And when she got something right, she let herself feel good about it, even if it was small. Raymond's words kept coming back to her during those early morning sessions. You're not playing to prove anything to anyone. You're playing because the music matters to you. She would repeat those words to herself like a quiet prayer whenever the old doubts crept in. And slowly, the doubts started to lose their power. Winter came and went. The days got longer. And Lena kept showing up. Every Thursday evening at the community center. Every morning at her kitchen table with her cheap little keyboard, she stopped counting how many weeks she had been learning. She stopped measuring herself against where she thought she should be. She just focused on the next note, the next song, the next small step forward. And then, about 8 months after that rainy Tuesday when she first walked through the community center doors, Raymond gave her a new piece of music to learn. Claire de Lune, he said, placing the sheet music on the piano stand. It's one of the most beautiful pieces ever written, and I think you're ready for it. Lena looked at the pages covered in notes and felt a familiar wave of doubt. This was real music, complicated music. The kind of music she had heard professionals play in concert halls and on recordings. The kind of music she never imagined she would be able to touch. Are you sure? She asked. This looks really difficult. Raymond smiled, that calm smile of his. It is difficult. But difficult doesn't mean impossible. Take it slow. One measure at a time. Don't worry about playing it perfectly. Just get to know it. So Lena took the sheet music home and began the long process of learning. She worked on it every morning, sometimes spending 20 minutes on just a few notes. The melody was gentle and flowing, like water moving over smooth stones, but getting her fingers to create that flow was another thing entirely. Her hands wanted to tense up. Her timing was off. She would get halfway through a phrase and then stumble, having to start over from the beginning. Weeks passed. Then months. Spring arrived, and the trees outside her apartment window burst into green. Her mother's health had stabilized a bit, which was a small blessing, and every day, Lena worked on her piece. She started to notice something surprising. The music was becoming a kind of meditation for her. When she sat down at the keyboard in the quiet of the early morning, the rest of the world seemed to fall away. She wasn't thinking about work or bills or her mother's medications or anything else. She was just there, in that moment, with the music. It was the most peaceful part of her day, and slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice it at first, the piece began to come together. One morning, about 4 months after Raymond had given her the sheet music, Lena sat down to practice like she always did. The sun was just starting to come up, painting her small kitchen in shades of pink and gold. She placed her hands on the keys, took a breath, and began to play. And this time, something was different. The notes flowed out of her fingers like they had always been there, just waiting to be released. Her hands moved smoothly across the keys. Not perfect, but close. The melody rose and fell, gentle and beautiful, filling her tiny apartment with sound. She didn't stumble, she didn't freeze, she just played, from the first note all the way to the last. When the final chord faded into silence, Lena sat there for a long moment, not moving. Then she realized her face was wet. She was crying. Not from sadness or frustration, but from something she couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe, or joy, or the simple, overwhelming feeling of having done something she never thought she could do. She had played it. The whole piece, from beginning to end. That Thursday, she played it for Raymond at their lesson. Her hands shook a little from nerves, and she made a few small mistakes, but she got through it. When she finished, she looked up at him, almost afraid to see his reaction. Raymond was smiling, and his eyes were shining with something that looked like pride. Beautiful, he said. Absolutely beautiful. After that, things began to move faster. Raymond suggested she perform at a small showcase the community center was hosting for its students. Lena's first instinct was to say no. Playing for herself was one thing. Playing for an audience was something else entirely. But Raymond encouraged her, and something inside her wanted to try. The showcase was held on a Saturday afternoon in the community center's main hall. There were about 30 people in the audience, mostly family members and friends of the students performing. Lena had no one to bring except her mother, who sat in the front row in her wheelchair, wrapped in a warm blanket. When it was Lena's turn, she walked to the piano on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. Her heart was pounding so hard, she could hear it in her ears. She sat down on the bench and looked at the keys. And for a terrifying second, her mind went completely blank. But then she took a breath. She remembered Raymond's words. She remembered all those early mornings, all those small victories, All those moments when she wanted to give up but didn't, and she began to play. It wasn't her best performance. Her hands trembled slightly, and she rushed through a few sections, but she made it through the entire piece without stopping. And when she played the final note and looked up, she saw something that made her heart swell. Her mother was crying, and smiling, and clapping harder than anyone else in the room. After the showcase, something unexpected happened. A woman approached Lena and introduced herself as a writer for the local newspaper. She had been in the audience watching her daughter perform and had noticed Lena. She asked if she could do a short interview about her story. Lena almost said no. Her story didn't seem special to her. She was just a woman who had decided to learn piano later in life. Nothing remarkable about that. But the writer insisted, and Raymond encouraged her. So she agreed. The article came out 2 weeks later. It was a small piece on the 3rd page of the community section, with a photo of Lena sitting at the piano. The headline read, "Local woman proves it's never too late to follow a dream." Lena didn't expect much from it, but within days, something strange started happening. Letters began arriving at the community center, addressed to her. Emails came through the center's website. People she had never met were reaching out to tell her that her story had touched them. A 60-year-old man wrote to say he had always wanted to paint but thought he was too old. After reading about Lena, he had signed up for an art class. A young mother wrote to say she had given up on writing years ago but was now working on her first short story. A retired teacher said she had started learning to dance. Lena read every single message, and each one felt like a small miracle. She had started this journey thinking it was just about her, just about a silly dream she had been too afraid to chase. But now she was beginning to realize it was about something bigger. It was about all the people who had ever been told they were too late. All the dreams that had been buried under years of doubt and fear. All the silent songs waiting to be sung. And Lena was just getting started. 2 years had passed since that rainy Tuesday evening when Lena first walked through the doors of the community center. 2 years of early morning practice sessions, Thursday evening lessons, small victories, and quiet struggles. 2 years of slowly becoming someone she never thought she could be. The community center was hosting its annual fundraiser. And this year, Raymond had asked Lena to be one of the featured performers. Not in the student showcase like before, but on the main stage, playing in front of over 200 people who had come to support the center's programs. When he first asked her, Lena laughed and said he must be joking. But Raymond wasn't joking. He looked at her with those steady, knowing eyes and said, "You're ready. You've been ready for a while now. It's time to stop thinking of yourself as a student and start thinking of yourself as a musician." So here she was, backstage at the community center auditorium, her hands trembling and her stomach doing flips. She peeked through the curtain and saw the rows of seats filling up with people. In the front row, her mother sat in her wheelchair, wearing her nicest dress, the blue one with the tiny white flowers. She had insisted on getting her hair done for the occasion. She looked beautiful. Next to her mother sat Raymond, looking a little thinner than he used to, a little more tired. He had been slowing down lately, moving a bit more carefully, taking longer rests between lessons. When Lena asked if he was feeling okay, he would wave off her concern and change the subject. But she could see it. Time was catching up with him, the way it catches up with everyone eventually. The lights in the auditorium dimmed, and the host walked onto the stage to welcome the audience. Lena's heart was beating so fast, she thought it might burst right out of her chest. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe, tried to remember everything Raymond had taught her. You're not playing to prove anything to anyone. You're playing because the music matters to you. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage, on legs that felt like they were made of water. The piano sat there, waiting for her, gleaming under the spotlight. She sat down on the bench and placed her hands on the keys. The audience went quiet. 200 people, all watching her, all waiting. She took one last breath. And then she began to play. The first piece was Clair de Lune, the song that had taken her 4 months to learn, the song that had made her cry the first time she played it all the way through. The melody flowed out of her fingers, gentle and beautiful, filling the auditorium with sound. She didn't think about the audience. She didn't think about making mistakes. She just let the music carry her, the way Raymond had taught her to do. When the last note faded into silence, there was a moment of stillness, and then the audience began to clap. The sound washed over her like a wave. Warm and overwhelming, she looked out at the crowd and saw her mother wiping tears from her eyes. She saw Raymond nodding slowly, a proud smile on his face. But she wasn't finished yet. She adjusted herself on the bench and placed her hands on the keys again. The audience grew quiet once more. "This next piece," she said, her voice a little shaky, "is something I wrote myself. It's called The Teacher's Hands. I wrote it for someone who changed my life, someone who saw something in me when I couldn't see it in myself. Someone who taught me that it's never too late to follow a dream." She looked directly at Raymond. His eyes were glistening. And then she played. The melody was simple but warm, full of gratitude and love. It started soft, like a quiet conversation, and then built slowly into something fuller, something that felt like hope. She poured everything she had into it, all the Thursday evenings, all the patient corrections, all the times Raymond had believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. When she finished, the audience rose to their feet. A standing ovation. Lena stood up from the bench and took a small bow. But her eyes were on Raymond. The whole time, he was clapping slowly, and there were tears running down his weathered face. After the show, Lena found Raymond backstage. She didn't say anything. She just walked up to him and wrapped her arms around him in a hug. He hugged her back, and for a long moment, they just stood there. Two people who had found each other exactly when they needed to. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Raymond pulled back and looked at her with those calm, steady eyes. "No," he said softly. "Thank you for reminding an old man why he started teaching in the first place." 3 months later, Raymond passed away peacefully in his sleep. His heart, the doctors said, it had simply decided it was time to rest. Lena cried for days. It felt like losing a father, even though she had only known him for a little over 2 years. He had given her so much in that short time. He had given her music, he had given her confidence, he had given her a second chance at a dream she thought was dead. The community center held a small memorial service for him. Dozens of former students came, some, now adults, who had learned from Raymond as children, others who had started later in life. Like Lena, they shared stories and memories and tears. And at the end of the service, Lena sat down at the piano and played The Teacher's Hands one more time. A few weeks later, the director of the community center approached Lena with a request. They needed someone to take over Raymond's Thursday evening piano lessons. Would she be willing to do it? Lena's first instinct was to say no. She wasn't qualified. She had only been playing for 2 years. She still had so much to learn herself. But then she thought about Raymond, and she knew exactly what he would say. "You're ready. You've been ready for a while now." So she said yes. Her first class had 5 students. 3 of them were children, eager and full of energy. One was a teenager who looked like she would rather be anywhere else. And one was a woman in her 50s named Grace, who sat at the piano with trembling hands and apologized before she even touched a key. "I'm sorry," Grace said. "I've never done this before. I'm probably too old to start." Lena smiled. She sat down next to Grace and looked at her with the same calm, steady gaze that Raymond had once given her. "Can I tell you something?" Lena said. 2 years ago, I was sitting exactly where you are now. I thought the same thing. I thought I was too old, too far behind, too untalented to ever learn. But someone very wise told me something that changed my life." Grace looked at her, waiting. Lena placed her hand gently on Grace's shoulder. "You're not too late. You're not too old. You're exactly where you need to be." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly and turned back to the piano. "Now," Lena said, "go ahead and press any key you want. I promise it won't bite." Grace took a shaky breath, lifted her hand, and pressed down on one of the white keys. A single note rang out into the room, simple and pure. And just like that, another dream began. Every Thursday evening, Lena taught her small class of students. She watched them struggle and grow. She celebrated their small victories. She reminded them, again and again, that the only thing that mattered was showing up and letting the music be whatever it needed to be. And sometimes, when the lesson was over and the students had gone home, Lena would sit alone at the piano in the quiet room. She would close her eyes and think about Raymond. She would think about that rainy Tuesday evening when her whole life changed. And she would smile. Because some dreams don't die, they just wait. They wait for the right moment, the right person, and the right push. And then they bloom into something beautiful.